Okay, so today we are diving deep into ADHD.
All right.
And, we're really trying to get past those surface level understandings.
Right.
Like just the kind of, oh, they just can't focus or can't sit still kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
We want to understand what it actually feels like,
Yeah.
to experience ADHD every day.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to help us with that, we have some source material that goes way beyond clinical definitions
Okay.
and really tries to make this complicated topic relatable.
Right.
And they do this through, personal stories, humor, metaphors, things like that.
I like it.
So, yeah, I think this is going to be a really insightful deep dive.
I think so too.
So to kind of set the stage here,
Yeah.
I think it's important to acknowledge that most people probably have some preconceived notions about ADHD.
For sure.
And these might come from, personal experiences, things they've heard, seen in the media, whatever.
Right.
And a lot of times these perceptions are, well, frankly, not super accurate.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
So maybe we can start by addressing some of those common misconceptions.
Okay, yeah.
Like, what are some of the biggest myths or stereotypes about ADHD that you encounter?
Well, like you mentioned, that it's just about being hyperactive or having trouble focusing.
Right.
Like, that's the only thing going on.
Yeah, or that it's, just a made-up thing.
Oh, yeah,
Or
definitely.
that people are just,
Just lazy.
yeah. Or just not trying hard enough.
Exactly. Or that it's not a real thing.
Right. Yeah.
Which is obviously not true.
Not true at all.
But our sources actually do a really great job of breaking down those myths.
Yes. And they use, like I said, these really interesting and humorous ways to explain these very complex ideas.
That's so important, I think.
So I'm curious, when you were looking at the source material, was there any particular example or analogy that really resonated with you?
Yeah, actually, there was one that really stood out.
Okay.
It was the one where they compared having a racing mind to having like 100 tabs open in a web browser.
Oh, I love that one.
Yeah, it's so relatable,
It really is. Like, you can just picture it.
You can totally visualize it.
Yeah, like your brain is just constantly bombarded with information and thoughts and ideas.
And it's all competing for your attention.
Right, and it makes it so hard to focus on any one thing.
Exactly.
So for someone who hasn't experienced that, maybe they have like 5 tabs open and they're, feeling a little bit stressed.
Right.
Can you even try to put into words what it's like to actually try to function with that like under tabs open feeling?
Oh, man, it's intense.
Yeah.
It's like, you're trying to have a conversation with someone,
Yeah.
but at the same time, you've got like, a dozen different videos playing in the background.
Right.
And notifications popping up constantly.
Well, yeah, sure.
And then you keep seeing like interesting links that you just have to click on. So, you're trying to listen to the person talking to you.
Yeah.
But your brain is just like pulled in so many different directions.
And you can't like close any of the tabs.
Exactly. It's not like you can just shut things off. It's they're there.
And it's not a matter of, just try harder.
No, not at all.
It's that like your brain is literally wired differently.
It's a neurological difference.
And it's processing information different.
Yeah, it's not about willpower. It's about how the brain is functioning.
Exactly. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's so important to get that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, another thing that our source material touched on that I thought was really interesting was this whole idea of impulsivity.
Right.
And, they actually had this this kind of funny anecdote about like suddenly buying a unicycle.
Oh, yeah.
Just on a whim,
Just because it seemed like a good idea at the time?
Exactly. And I think that example really illustrates a bigger point about impulsivity and how it manifests in people with ADHD.
For sure.
So can you kind of talk about that a little bit? Like what is it about ADHD that can lead to these kind of impulsive actions?
Well, it's not always about, making huge decisions or doing things that are like completely out there.
Right.
Sometimes it's just, like small things.
Yeah, like interrupting people.
Yeah, exactly. Or blurting things out.
Yeah, or like, starting a project and then
never finishing it.
Yeah, or getting distracted by something shiny.
Exactly. So, it's not always about those big decisions.
Right.
But it's about having this very strong urge to act on an impulse, even if, logically, it might not be the best idea.
Like that little voice is like, maybe not.
Yeah, but it's like the brakes don't engage.
Yes, the brakes.
Like the brain's braking system just doesn't quite work the same way. It's like it's delayed.
And so you just kind of like go for it.
Yeah, you just do it.
Now, I think it's important to acknowledge that, everyone experiences impulsivity to some degree.
No, absolutely.
Like we all have those moments where we, you know, say something without thinking.
Or buy something we don't need.
Exactly. Or, whatever it may be.
But it's different.
But what's the key difference between kind of that normal, everyday impulsivity and what someone with ADHD experiences?
It's really about the frequency, the intensity, and the impact it has on your life.
Okay, yeah.
So, like, if you're occasionally impulsive, it's probably not a big deal.
Right.
But for people with ADHD, it can be, a daily struggle.
And it can affect their relationships,
Absolutely.
their work, their, just their overall well-being.
It can be really challenging.
So you mentioned earlier that it's not about willpower, it's about how the brain is wired.
Right.
And I think that's a perfect segue into talking about the neurological basis of ADHD.
Okay, yeah.
So can you give us like a little ADHD 101 on the brain?
Right, so basically...
Like what's actually happening in the brain that leads to these experiences that we've been talking about?
Okay, well, remember that analogy of the 100 browser tabs?
Yes.
So that actually ties in really well with how the prefrontal cortex functions in people with ADHD.
Okay.
Now, the prefrontal cortex, it's like the command center of your brain.
Right.
It's responsible for all those executive functions,
Right.
like planning, focusing, controlling impulses, making decisions.
All the important stuff.
All the stuff that we need to function in the world.
Right.
But in people with ADHD, this area can be less active.
Interesting.
So it's like the command center is, maybe a little bit understaffed.
I like that. Okay.
And so it makes it much harder to, filter information.
You got all these tabs open and you can't
close them.
Yeah.
And you can't decide which one to focus on.
you can't organize them.
Exactly, just chaos.
Yeah, it's like a digital hoarding situation.
And it makes it much harder to, resist those urges, to control those impulses.
So going back to the unicycle example,
Right.
is there a connection there with how the brain processes rewards?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
So imagine your brain's reward center.
Sure.
It's like a pinball machine, right?
Okay. I like where this is going.
And every time you have a new idea, every time something exciting happens,
Ding, ding, ding.
it just lights up.
No.
All the bells and whistles are going off.
Then the dopamine is flowing.
Exactly. But here's the thing.
Oh, yeah.
For people with ADHD, that feeling fades really quickly.
Oh, yeah.
So they're constantly seeking that next dopamine hit.
Okay, so they need like more and more stimulation to get that same.
They need that novelty, that excitement,
So that's why something like buying a unicycle,
because it's new and different.
it's like, oh, it's going to be fun.
And the reward center is just going crazy.
Even though, like, logically, maybe it's not the most practical purchase,
Maybe not.
but it's like the brain is craving that reward,
Exactly.
and that's what drives that impulsive behavior.
Yeah, it's a really powerful force.
Wow, this is all making so much more sense now.
I'm glad to hear that.
Before I kind of had this idea that ADHD was just about attention, like the name suggests.
Right. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
Right, but what I'm realizing is that it's so much more than that.
It's so much more.
It's really about like how the brain functions on multiple levels.
Absolutely. And our source material actually touches on a few other key aspects of ADHD that I think are worth mentioning.
Yes, please.
So one of them is emotional dysregulation.
Okay, and what does that mean exactly?
Basically, it means that people with ADHD often experience emotions more intensely,
Okay.
and they can have a harder time regulating those emotions.
So like something happy happens, they might feel like super happy.
Exactly. Or if something sad happens, they might feel incredibly sad.
And it's hard to come back down from that.
Yeah, it's like the volume is turned up on their emotions.
And this can obviously lead to, challenges in relationships and just in life in general.
Absolutely.
And then another aspect that our sources mentioned was time management.
Oh, yes, time blindness.
Yes, the infamous time blindness.
It's a real struggle for a lot of people with ADHD.
So what is that all about? Like what makes time management so difficult?
Well, it's like their internal clock is a bit off.
Oh, okay.
Like they might have trouble estimating how long things will take.
Well,
Or they might get so engrossed in something that they completely lose track of time.
hyperfocus, yeah.
Exactly.
I've definitely been there.
It's like time just slips away.
It's like a black hole.
And then, they end up being late for things or missing deadlines.
Right, and then that just leads to more stress and anxiety.
Exactly. It's a vicious cycle.
So for our listeners out there, if any of this is resonating with you,
Yeah.
or if you know someone who might be dealing with these challenges, what would you say are the key takeaways here?
Well, first and foremost, I think it's crucial to remember that ADHD is not a character flaw. It's a neurodevelopmental difference.
It's how your brain is wired.
Exactly. And it's not something that people can just, snap out of.
Or just try harder.
Right. It's not about willpower.
It's about understanding that people with ADHD experience the world in a fundamentally different way.
Yeah, and that their struggles are very real.
And that those struggles deserve to be acknowledged and validated.
Absolutely. And that empathy and understanding are so important.
And our sources actually go a step further, right?
Yeah, they do.
They suggest that maybe instead of expecting people with ADHD to constantly adapt to a world that wasn't built for them,
Right.
maybe the world needs to adapt a bit too.
Yes. Like, why are we always putting the onus on the individual to change?
Yeah, that's a great point.
Maybe we need to start thinking about how we can create environments that are more inclusive and accommodating of neurodiversity.
And what might that look like?
Well, I think it starts with education.
Yeah.
Like traditional educational settings with their, long lectures and standardized tests, they're often not a good fit for students with ADHD.
Yeah, they don't really play to their strengths.
Exactly. So what if we explored alternative learning environments that, leverage those strengths?
So like what kind of strengths are we talking about?
Well, people with ADHD are often incredibly creative.
Okay.
They're great at thinking outside the box.
The problem solvers.
Exactly. They're often very energetic and passionate, and they're hands-on learners.
So maybe instead of, forcing them to sit still for hours on end,
Right.
we give them opportunities to move around, to be creative, to explore their interests.
Yeah, and to learn in a way that works for them.
That's so important.
And, it's not just about education.
Right.
I think this applies to workplaces too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like so many workplaces are designed for, the neurotypical brain.
The 9 to 5, sit at your desk.
Exactly. And that can be really challenging for people with ADHD.
So maybe we need to start thinking about, flexible work schedules.
Right.
Different kinds of work environments.
More breaks, more opportunities for movement.
And just, more understanding and acceptance of the fact that people's brains work differently.
Exactly. And that's okay.
It's not a bad thing.
It's not a bad thing at all.
In fact, it can be a really good thing.
It can bring a lot of value.
Absolutely.
Diversity is important.
Diversity is key. Neurodiversity included.
Absolutely.
So for anyone listening who wants to learn more,
Yes.
or maybe even explore if some of these things resonate with their own experience, what are some good next steps?
Well, first of all, I would say don't self-diagnose.
Right.
If you're concerned, reach out to a qualified professional.
Yeah, a doctor, a therapist.
Who can properly assess and diagnose.
And there are tons of reputable resources online, too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Like CHADD, Attitude Magazine.
Those are great resources.
And, just remember that knowledge is power.
It really is.
The more we understand about ADHD,
The better
equipped we'll be to support ourselves and others.
Exactly.
So, a huge thank you to you for taking this deep dive with us.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been really enlightening, and I hope our listeners have come away with a new perspective on ADHD.
I hope so, too.
And maybe some curiosity to learn more.
And to challenge those assumptions.
Yeah, because ultimately, understanding neurodiversity benefits everyone.
It really does.
So that's it for today's deep dive.
Until next time.
We'll see you next time.
Bye.